The morning sun barely crested the Afghan mountains when Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell received the emergency call that would change everything. Her boots hit the tarmac at Bagram Air Base as she sprinted toward her A-10 Thunderbolt II, the distinctive twin-engine aircraft that had earned the nickname Warthog for its ungainly appearance and devastating firepower. The briefing had been rushed, urgent voices crackling through the radio static. A Navy SEAL team was pinned down in a remote valley, taking heavy fire from entrenched Taliban positions. What should have been a routine reconnaissance mission had turned into a nightmare when the SEALs stumbled upon a major enemy stronghold. Sarah's hands moved with practiced precision as she completed her pre-flight checklist. The A-10's massive Guy-weight Avenger cannon dominated the aircraft's nose, capable of firing 3,900 rounds per minute of depleted uranium ammunition. She had trained for years to master this flying tank, understanding that her role as a close air support pilot meant the difference between life and death for ground forces. The communication from the trapped SEAL team crackled through her headset as she taxied toward the runway. Team leader, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez's voice carried the controlled tension of a man who had seen too much combat. His team of 6 elite operators had been conducting surveillance on suspected enemy movement when they discovered an elaborate cave system housing dozens of fighters and weapons caches. Rodriguez and his team had been observing the target for 3 hours when everything went wrong. A loose rock dislodged by Petty Officer James Chen during a position change had tumbled down the mountainside, alerting the enemy to their presence. Within minutes, automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions, trapping the SEALs on a narrow ledge with minimal cover. The team's radio operator, Petty Officer Second Class Maria Santos, had managed to establish contact with headquarters despite the chaos around them. Her calm professionalism under fire impressed even her veteran teammates as she coordinated their desperate situation with incoming support assets. The SEALs were running low on ammunition, and the enemy was maneuvering to flank their position. Sarah's A-10 lifted off from Bagram just as the sun fully cleared the mountain peaks, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain below. Her aircraft carried a full complement of munitions, the devastating 30mm cannon, Maverick missiles, and precision-guided bombs. More importantly, she carried years of training and an unwavering commitment to bringing every American home. The flight to the target area would take 43 minutes at maximum speed. Sarah used every second to study the terrain maps and coordinate with the forward air controller attached to the SEAL team. The mountains of Afghanistan presented unique challenges for close air support missions, with rapidly changing weather conditions and terrain that could mask enemy positions until the last moment. As Sarah approached the target area, she could see smoke rising from the valley below. The SEALs had been forced to use their limited supply of grenades to keep the enemy at bay, creating a haze that would complicate her ability to identify friendly versus enemy positions. She knew that precision would be everything in this mission. Chief Rodriguez's voice came through her radio again, this time with more urgency. The enemy had brought up a heavy machine gun and was systematically destroying the SEALs' defensive positions. 2 team members were already wounded and their ammunition was critically low. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Sarah began her approach, dropping altitude to get a better view of the battlefield below. The A-10's titanium armor plating could withstand significant small arms fire, but she needed to be careful of potential surface-to-air missiles or heavy anti-aircraft weapons. Intelligence suggested the enemy might have acquired advanced weaponry from various sources. The rugged Afghan landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, a maze of valleys, ridges, and ancient paths that had seen countless conflicts throughout history. Sarah understood that she was about to become part of that history, joining the ranks of pilots who had faced impossible odds to save American lives. Her weapon systems came online as she approached the target coordinates. The A-10's heads-up display showed multiple potential targets, but distinguishing between enemy positions and the SEAL's location would require precise coordination with the ground team. One mistake could prove catastrophic for the very people she was trying to save. Petty Officer Santos continued providing updates from the ground, her voice steady despite the gunfire clearly audible in the background. The SEALs had identified at least 3 major enemy positions: a machine gun nest on the eastern ridge, mortar teams in the valley floor, and sniper positions among the rocks to the west. Each position posed a unique challenge for Sarah's attack runs. The A-10's slow speed and heavy armor made it ideal for close air support missions, but it also meant Sarah would be exposed to enemy fire for extended periods during each attack pass. She calculated her approach angles carefully, knowing that the lives of 6 elite warriors depended on her skill and courage. As she prepared for her first attack run, Sarah reflected on the brotherhood that existed between air and ground forces. Though she had never met Chief Rodriguez or his team, she felt a profound responsibility for their safety. The trust they placed in her abilities was both humbling and motivating. The enemy positions became clearer as Sarah descended toward the valley. Muzzle flashes from multiple weapons created a deadly light show among the rocks and caves below. The SEALs were completely surrounded, with only their superior training and limited cover keeping them alive. Sarah's finger hovered over the weapon release controls as she lined up her first target. The machine gun nest on the eastern ridge had the best angle on the SEAL's position and needed to be eliminated first. She could see the enemy fighters moving with practiced efficiency, suggesting these were not inexperienced insurgents but well-trained combatants. The moment of truth approached as Sarah's A-10 screamed down toward the battlefield. The SEALs below had no idea that their salvation was about to arrive in the form of a determined pilot and her flying tank, ready to turn the tide of a desperate battle in the remote mountains of Afghanistan. The first burst from Sarah's Gyu-8 cannon shattered the morning silence with a sound like thunder splitting the earth. The 30mm rounds tore through the eastern ridge where the enemy machine gun had been spitting death at the trapped SEALs below. Rock and debris exploded outward as the depleted uranium ammunition found its mark, silencing the heavy weapon in a spectacular display of firepower. Chief Rodriguez pressed himself against the rocky outcrop that had become his temporary fortress, feeling the pressure wave from Sarah's cannon fire wash over his position. For the first time in hours, the constant chatter of enemy machine gun fire had stopped. He keyed his radio with trembling fingers, not from fear but from the adrenaline that comes with sudden hope. Unknown aircraft, this is Viper 6. That was a beautiful sight. Can you identify yourself? Sarah's voice crackled through the radio static, calm and professional despite the chaos unfolding below. Viper 6. This is Hawkeye 2-1, A-10 Warthog inbound for close air support. I've got eyes on your position and am tracking multiple enemy contacts. Sit tight, we're going to get you out of there. The relief in Rodriguez's voice was unmistakable. Hawkeye 2-1, you're a sight for sore eyes. We have 2 wounded and are critically low on ammunition. Enemy positions include mortar teams in the valley floor and sniper positions to our west. Sarah banked her A-10 sharply, coming around for another pass while scanning the terrain below for additional threats. The enemy had been quick to respond to her first attack, with several fighters abandoning their positions to seek better cover. She could see muzzle flashes from at least 4 different locations as they attempted to engage her aircraft. The distinctive whistle of incoming mortar rounds echoed through the valley as the enemy adjusted their indirect fire to target Sarah's aircraft. The rounds exploded harmlessly behind her A-10, but she knew they were learning her attack patterns and would become more accurate with each pass. Petty Officer Chen, the SEAL team's medic, worked frantically to treat his wounded teammates, while the firefight continued around him. Petty Officer First Class David Walsh had taken shrapnel in his shoulder from an enemy grenade, while Petty Officer Second Class Antonio Rivera was bleeding from a head wound caused by flying rock fragments. "Doc, how are our casualties?" Rodriguez called out during a brief lull in the enemy fire. Chen's response was clipped but professional. "Walsh can still fight, but Rivera needs evacuation within the next 2 hours. He's stable for now, but that head wound could get worse fast." The urgency of the medical situation added another layer of complexity to Sarah's mission. Not only did she need to neutralize the enemy forces, but she had to do it quickly enough to allow for a medical evacuation helicopter to reach the SEALs safely. Sarah identified her next target, a mortar position nestled among a cluster of boulders in the valley floor. The crew had been remarkably accurate with their indirect fire, suggesting they were experienced fighters who knew the terrain well. She adjusted her approach angle to attack from the north, using a ridgeline to mask her approach until the last possible moment. The enemy had anticipated her move. As Sarah's A-10 crested the ridge, tracer rounds from multiple small arms positions streaked past her cockpit. The distinctive green lines of enemy fire created a deadly light show, but Sarah's focus remained locked on her target. The mortar position grew larger in her sights as she committed to the attack run. Her Maverick missile streaked away from the aircraft with a brilliant flash, its infrared seeker head locked onto the heat signature of the enemy mortar tube. The explosion sent a column of smoke and debris high into the air, confirming the destruction of another enemy position. But the enemy wasn't finished. From concealed positions among the rocks, fighters armed with rocket-propelled grenades began engaging Sarah's aircraft. The A-10's heavy armor could withstand significant damage, but a direct hit from an RPG could still bring down the tough aircraft. Rodriguez watched the aerial battle unfolding above his position with a mixture of awe and concern. He had worked with Air Force close air support pilots before, but this unknown pilot was displaying a level of skill and courage that impressed even his veteran team. Hawkeye 2-1, be advised we're seeing RPG teams moving to engage you from the southern approach. Recommend you vary your attack patterns. Sarah's voice remained steady despite the increasing enemy fire. Copy that, Viper 6. I see them. Going to try a different approach for the next run. The western sniper positions had been taking potshots at the SEALs throughout the morning, forcing them to keep their heads down and limiting their ability to return effective fire. Sarah decided to target these positions next, but their placement among the rocky terrain would require a precise attack to avoid collateral damage to nearby caves that might contain civilians. She climbed to gain altitude and study the target area more carefully. The snipers had chosen their positions well, with natural rock formations providing excellent concealment and fields of fire. Sarah would need to attack from an unexpected angle to catch them by surprise. The enemy fighters below had learned to recognize the distinctive sound of the A-10's twin engines, and Sarah could see them scrambling for better positions each time she appeared overhead. Their discipline and tactical awareness suggested these were not typical insurgent fighters but possibly foreign fighters or specially trained units. Petty Officer Santos continued her role as the link between air and ground forces, providing Sarah with real-time updates on enemy movements and confirming the results of each attack. Her calm professionalism under fire had impressed everyone on the team and was proving invaluable in coordinating the close air support mission. Hawkeye 2-1, this is Viper 6 radio. I count at least 15 enemy fighters still active, concentrated in 3 main groups. They're trying to coordinate a flanking maneuver on our eastern approach. Sarah acknowledged the intelligence and began planning her next attack. The enemy's attempt to flank the SEAL's position had to be stopped immediately, but it would require her to fly directly into the teeth of their defensive fire. The A-10 was built for exactly this type of mission, but it would test both aircraft and pilot to their limits. As she rolled in for another attack run, Sarah couldn't help but think about the trust that the 6 SEALs below had placed in her. They had never met, but the bonds forged in combat transcended personal relationships. She was their lifeline, and they were depending on her to bring them home alive. The enemy's coordinated response caught Sarah off guard as she rolled in for her third attack run. What had started as scattered resistance had evolved into a sophisticated defense, with fighters positioned to create overlapping fields of fire that turned the valley into a deadly gauntlet. Tracer rounds from at least 6 different positions converged on her A-10 as she descended toward the western sniper. Nests the distinctive crack of bullets, striking her aircraft's titanium armor sent vibrations through the cockpit. But Sarah maintained her focus on the target below. The A-10 had been designed to absorb punishment, and she trusted the engineers who had built her aircraft to survive whatever the enemy could throw at them. Chief Rodriguez watched helplessly as enemy fighters emerged from previously hidden positions, their weapons trained skyward at the aircraft that had become his team's only hope for survival. The SEALs were pinned down so completely that they couldn't provide covering fire for their air support, leaving Sarah to face the enemy's full attention alone. Hawkeye 2-1, break right. Break right, Rodriguez shouted into his radio as he spotted an RPG team taking aim at Sarah's aircraft from a concealed position among the rocks. The rocket-propelled grenade streaked past Sarah's starboard wing, close enough that she could see the vapor trail in her peripheral vision. She pulled hard on the stick, sending her A-10 into a sharp climbing turn that stressed both aircraft and pilot to their limits. The heavy aircraft wasn't designed for aerobatic maneuvers, but it responded to her desperate inputs with surprising agility. Down in their defensive positions, the SEALs were running dangerously low on ammunition. Petty Officer First Class Michael Thompson, the team's designated marksman, had been conserving his rounds carefully, but even his disciplined fire couldn't last much longer. Each shot had to count, and the enemy seemed to have an endless supply of fighters. "Chief, I'm down to my last magazine," Thompson reported during a brief lull in the firefight. "Same with Martinez and Jackson. We need to make something happen soon." Rodriguez checked his own ammunition supply and grimaced. The team had started the mission with standard combat loads, but the extended firefight had depleted their resources faster than expected. Without resupply or immediate extraction, they would be reduced to fighting with knives and bare hands within the hour. Sarah completed her evasive maneuver and came back around to attack the sniper positions from an unexpected angle. The western ridge presented a challenging target, with enemy fighters concealed among natural rock formations that provided excellent protection from air attack. She would need to place her cannon fire with surgical precision to be effective. The GAU-8 cannon roared to life again, sending a stream of 30mm rounds into the rocky terrain where the snipers had been operating. The depleted uranium ammunition shattered stone and sent deadly fragments in all directions, forcing the enemy fighters to abandon their carefully prepared positions. But the enemy had learned from her previous attacks and had prepared a nasty surprise. As Sarah pulled up from her strafing run, hidden anti-aircraft guns opened fire from multiple positions around the valley. The larger caliber rounds posed a much more serious threat to her A-10 than small arms fire or RPGs. One burst of anti-aircraft fire stitched across her port wing, punching holes through the metal skin and damaging several hydraulic lines. Warning lights began flashing on Sarah's instrument panel as various aircraft systems reported damage. The A-10's redundant design meant she could continue flying, but her aircraft's performance was degraded. "Viper 6, this is Hawkeye 2-1. I'm taking significant fire and have some aircraft damage, but I'm still mission capable. How are you holding up down there?" Rodriguez's response carried the weight of desperation barely held in check. "We're in bad shape, Hawkeye. Running critically low on ammo, and the enemy is massing for what looks like a final assault. We need immediate extraction or heavy fire support." Sarah assessed her tactical situation while dodging another barrage of anti-aircraft fire. Her aircraft was damaged but still flyable. She had expended roughly half her ammunition, and the enemy was proving to be more organized and better equipped than expected. The mission was becoming increasingly dangerous, but abandoning the SEALs was not an option. The enemy's tactics had evolved throughout the engagement, suggesting they had experienced leadership and possibly foreign training. Their use of coordinated fire and movement, combined with well-concealed positions and modern weapons, painted a picture of a sophisticated enemy force rather than typical insurgent fighters. Petty Officer Santos continued her vital role as radio man despite the increasingly desperate situation. Her equipment had taken shrapnel damage from near misses, but she maintained communication with both Sarah overhead and headquarters back at Bagram. The coordination she provided was keeping the close air support mission from devolving into chaos. "Hawkeye 2-1. Be advised that enemy reinforcements are moving up the valley from the south. I count approximately 20 additional fighters with what appears to be crew-served weapons." The news of enemy reinforcements sent a chill through Sarah's blood. The SEALs were already outnumbered and outgunned by the original enemy force. Additional fighters would make their situation completely untenable, even with her continued air support. She keyed her radio to contact headquarters and request additional support assets. "Bagram Control, this is Hawkeye 2-1. Request immediate backup for close air support mission. Enemy force larger than expected and friendlies are in immediate danger." The response from headquarters was not what she hoped to hear. "Hawkeye 2-1, negative on immediate backup. Nearest available aircraft is 45 minutes out. You're on your own until then." 45 minutes might as well have been 45 hours given the current tactical situation. The SEALs didn't have enough ammunition to last another 15 minutes, let alone 3/4 of an hour. Sarah would have to find a way to neutralize the enemy threat using only her remaining munitions and damaged aircraft. The enemy reinforcements were moving through the valley with tactical discipline that impressed even Sarah's experienced eye. They bounded from cover to cover in small groups, providing mutual support and presenting difficult targets for air attack. Their movement suggested they intended to surround the SEAL position completely, cutting off any possibility of escape. Chief Rodriguez had reached the same conclusion about the enemy's intentions. His team was already surrounded on 3 sides, and the approaching reinforcements would close the final escape route. The rocky terrain that had provided some protection was about to become their tomb. Unless something changed dramatically, Ray made a command decision that would have horrified her instructors but seemed like the only viable option given the circumstances. Instead of continuing to make individual attack runs against separate targets, she would concentrate all her remaining firepower on breaking the enemy's encirclement attempt. The plan was dangerous and unconventional, but it offered the best chance of creating an opening for the SEALs to escape or for reinforcements to reach them. Sarah began her approach for what could be her final attack run, knowing that everything depended on the next few minutes of flying. Sarah's unconventional plan required her to fly lower and slower than any tactical manual would recommend, essentially turning her A-10 into a flying artillery platform that could deliver sustained fire support. She would make multiple passes along the same attack corridor, using her remaining ammunition to create a corridor of destruction that might allow the SEALs to break out of their encirclement. The first pass targeted the approaching reinforcements, catching them in the open as they moved through a narrow section of the valley. Sarah's GAU-8 cannon swept across their formation like a deadly scythe, the 30mm rounds creating explosions of rock and earth wherever they struck. The surviving enemy fighters scattered for cover, their advance temporarily halted. Chief Rodriguez recognized the opportunity immediately. "Team, we've got a window. Chen, how mobile is Rivera?" The medic checked on his patient quickly. "He's conscious and can move, but he'll need help. Walsh is good to go despite the shoulder wound." Rodriguez made the decision that would either save his team or get them all killed. "We're moving in 30 seconds. Thompson and Martinez provide covering fire. Santos maintain contact with our Angel overhead. Everyone else we bound by pairs toward the eastern ridge." The SEALs began their desperate breakout attempt, just as Sarah completed her second strafing run. She had targeted the original enemy positions on the eastern ridge, the same area where the machine gun nest had been eliminated earlier. Her cannon fire pulverized the rocky terrain, creating clouds of dust and debris that would provide concealment for the escaping SEALs. But the enemy had anticipated this move. As soon as the SEALs began moving from their defensive positions, previously hidden fighters emerged from concealed bunkers and began engaging them with automatic weapons fire. The valley erupted in a crossfire that caught the SEAL team in the open. Petty Officer Martinez stumbled and fell as a burst of enemy fire stitched across his path. Thompson immediately bounded back to his position, providing covering fire while dragging his wounded teammate toward a rocky outcrop that offered minimal protection. "Contact left! Contact left!" Thompson shouted as muzzle flashes erupted from a previously undetected enemy position. The SEALs found themselves caught between the original enemy forces and the newly revealed bunker complex. Sarah saw the deadly situation unfolding below and made an instantaneous decision that violated every rule of close air support. She dove her damaged A-10 directly toward the enemy bunker, flying so low that her landing gear nearly scraped the rocky terrain. The enemy fighters were forced to choose between engaging the SEALs and defending themselves against her suicidal attack run. Her cannon fire at such close range was devastatingly effective. The 30mm rounds punched through rock and earth, collapsing part of the bunker complex and silencing several enemy weapons positions. But the low altitude and slow speed made her A-10 an easy target for every enemy fighter in the valley. Anti-aircraft fire from multiple positions converged on Sarah's aircraft as she pulled up from her attack run. The larger caliber rounds punched through her starboard engine, causing it to flame out and begin trailing smoke. Additional hits damaged her hydraulic systems and flight controls, making the aircraft increasingly difficult to fly. Hawkeye 2-1, your aircraft is smoking badly. What's your status? Rodriguez called out with concern evident in his voice. Sarah fought to maintain control of her damaged A-10 while assessing the extent of her aircraft's injuries. The starboard engine was completely dead. Multiple hydraulic systems were failing, and she was losing fuel from punctured tanks. The aircraft was still flyable, but probably not for much longer. I'm still mission capable. Viper 6, continue your movement while I provide covering fire. Her determination inspired the SEALs to push forward despite their precarious situation. Chen and Jackson worked together to help the wounded Rivera move toward better cover, while Walsh provided suppressing fire with his remaining ammunition, despite his injured shoulder. The enemy had begun to recover from Sarah's surprise attack and was reorganizing their defense. Fresh fighters moved to replace those killed or wounded in the bunker complex, and the anti-aircraft guns shifted positions to better engage her aircraft. The enemy commander was learning from each engagement and adapting quickly. Sarah's fuel situation was becoming critical. The combination of combat damage and high-power flying had depleted her tanks faster than normal. She estimated 15 minutes of flying time remaining, maybe less if she continued making high-power attack runs. The SEALs had covered about half the distance to the eastern ridge when they encountered another hidden enemy position. This bunker had been concealed so well that neither Sarah nor the ground team had detected it during the earlier reconnaissance. Automatic weapons fire erupted from the camouflaged position, pinning down the entire SEAL team. "We're stopped cold," Rodriguez reported. "Hidden bunker at grid coordinates." Rattled off the target location while his team sought whatever cover they could find among the scattered rocks. Sarah located the target and realized why it had been so difficult to detect. The bunker was built into a natural cave system, with only the weapon ports visible from the air. Attacking it would require her to fly directly into a funnel of concentrated enemy fire from both the bunker and supporting positions. Her damaged A-10 shuddered as she lined up for the attack run. The port engine was running roughly, probably damaged by debris from the earlier hits, and her flight controls were becoming increasingly sluggish. Warning lights continued to flash across her instrument panel, painting the cockpit in an ominous red glow. The bunker erupted in muzzle flashes as Sarah's aircraft approached. Heavy machine gun fire reached up toward her A-10 like deadly fingers, while supporting positions added their own firepower to the defensive barrage. Sarah flew straight through the concentrated fire, refusing to deviate from her attack course. Her remaining Maverick missile streaked away from the aircraft, its warhead detonating inside the cave entrance with devastating effect. The explosion brought down tons of rock, sealing the bunker and silencing its weapons. But the victory came at a price that Sarah was only beginning to understand. Multiple hits had damaged her port engine, which was now running so roughly that she expected it to fail at any moment. Her fuel tanks were nearly empty, and several critical aircraft systems were operating on backup power. The A-10 was living up to its reputation for survivability, but even the tough Warthog had its limits. Viper 6, the bunker is neutralized. Continue your movement toward the extraction point, Rodriguez acknowledged while moving his team forward again, but he could see that Sarah's aircraft was in serious trouble. Black smoke now trailed from both engines, and the A-10's flight path had become noticeably erratic as Sarah struggled with damaged controls. The eastern ridge was within reach, but the SEALs still faced scattered enemy resistance from fighters who had survived the air attacks. These survivors were determined to exact revenge for their fallen comrades, and they fought with the desperation of cornered animals. The port engine finally succumbed to its damage with a violent shudder that shook the entire aircraft. Sarah felt the A-10 lurch to one side as the engine seized, leaving her flying on a single power plant that was already operating beyond its normal limits. The aircraft's performance degraded dramatically, making it difficult to maintain altitude and nearly impossible to execute effective attack runs. Chief Rodriguez watched the smoke trail from Sarah's aircraft grow thicker and darker, knowing that their guardian angel was fighting her own desperate battle to stay airborne. The SEALs had made significant progress toward the eastern ridge, but scattered enemy fighters continued to harass their movement with sporadic gunfire. Hawkeye 2-1, recommend you consider emergency landing procedures. Your aircraft appears to be in serious distress, Rodriguez transmitted, though he dreaded the thought of losing their air support. Sarah's response came through gritted teeth as she wrestled with increasingly unresponsive flight controls. Negative, Viper 6. I've still got fight left in this bird and you're not clear yet. Continuing mission. The enemy had regrouped faster than expected, with surviving fighters taking up new positions that blocked the SEALs' advance toward the extraction point. These weren't regular insurgent forces giving up after taking casualties. They displayed the discipline and determination of well-trained soldiers who understood the tactical situation and were willing to fight to the end. Petty Officer Santos had been monitoring multiple radio frequencies, trying to coordinate with headquarters while maintaining contact with Sarah overhead. Her equipment was damaged but still functional, and she had heard something in the background chatter that gave her hope. "Chief, I'm picking up helicopter traffic on the emergency frequency. Sounds like a medical evacuation bird is trying to reach our area, but they're being warned off due to hostile fire." Rodriguez felt a surge of hope mixed with frustration. Medical evacuation meant that help was finally on the way, but the helicopter would be defenseless against the enemy fighters still active in the valley. The chopper crew would need the area to be secured before they could attempt a landing. Sarah had heard the same radio traffic and understood the implications. A medical evacuation helicopter was exactly what the wounded SEALs needed, but it would be shot down before it could land, unless she could eliminate the remaining enemy positions. Her damaged A-10 barely had enough power to stay airborne, but she had to find a way to clear the landing zone. The remaining enemy fighters had learned to recognize the sound of her approach and were quick to take cover when they heard her engines. This forced Sarah to vary her tactics, using the A-10's damaged condition to her advantage by making unpredictable approach angles that confused the enemy's defensive preparations. She lined up for what she knew would have to be her final attack run. Her fuel gauges showed levels so low they were barely registering, and the remaining engine was running rough enough that she expected it to fail at any moment. The aircraft was held together more by determination than engineering at this point. The target was a cluster of enemy fighters who had positioned themselves along the SEAL's route to the extraction point. They were well concealed among the rocks and had clear fields of fire that would make any helicopter landing attempt suicidal. Sarah would have to attack from an angle that exposed her to fire from multiple directions. As she began her descent toward the target, the enemy opened up with everything they had remaining. Tracer rounds from small arms fire created streams of light that converged on her aircraft, while the few surviving RPG teams launched their remaining rockets. The air around Sarah's A-10 filled with deadly projectiles as every enemy fighter tried to bring down the aircraft that had decimated their forces. Multiple hits struck her aircraft during the final attack run. The cockpit canopy cracked from a near miss and several rounds punched through the fuselage just behind Sarah's seat. But she maintained her attack course, pouring her remaining cannon ammunition into the enemy positions with deadly accuracy. The GAU-8 cannon fell silent as Sarah expended her last 30mm round, leaving her defenseless except for the aircraft itself. The enemy fighters were neutralized, but her A-10 was finished. The remaining engine began to windmill as it lost power, and multiple warning systems screamed for her attention. "Viper 6, I'm out of ammunition and losing my last engine. The area should be clear for helicopter landing. I'm going to try to make it back to base." Rodriguez watched Sarah's smoking aircraft struggle to gain altitude as it turned toward the distant mountains. He knew she was making an almost impossible attempt to nurse her dying machine back to friendly territory, but he also understood why she had to try. The medical evacuation helicopter appeared over the ridge just minutes after Sarah's departure, its crew having waited for the all-clear before entering the hostile valley. The pilot executed a quick landing in a small clearing near the SEAL position, his crew chief providing covering fire while the team loaded their wounded. Petty Officer Rivera was unconscious but stable, as Chen and the helicopter medic worked to secure him for transport. The head wound had stopped bleeding, but he needed immediate surgery that could only be provided at a major medical facility. Walsh's shoulder wound was painful but not life-threatening, allowing him to help load equipment. The helicopter lifted off with its precious cargo just as fresh enemy fighters began appearing on the distant ridges. The evacuation had been completed with minutes to spare, thanks to Sarah's sacrifice of her aircraft to clear the landing zone. But Sarah's own situation was becoming increasingly desperate. Flying on momentum more than power, her A-10 was losing altitude steadily despite her best efforts to maintain level flight. The mountain peaks between her position and Bagram Air Base loomed ahead like insurmountable barriers. Her radio crackled with transmissions from search and rescue aircraft that had been scrambled when her emergency was reported. "Hawkeye 2-1, this is Rescue 7-1. We have your approximate position and are inbound to assist. What is your current status?" Sarah assessed her situation with the clinical detachment that came with extensive training. "Rescue 7-1, I have complete engine failure and am losing altitude rapidly. I don't think I can clear the mountain ridge ahead. May have to eject." The thought of ejecting over enemy territory was sobering, but it was preferable to controlled flight into the mountainside. Sarah began preparing for ejection while continuing to coax every bit of performance from her dying aircraft. Chief Rodriguez and his remaining team members monitored the emergency frequency as they waited for their own extraction helicopter. They could hear the desperation in the voices of the rescue crews as they raced to reach Sarah's position before it was too late. The pilot who had saved their lives was now fighting for her own survival, and there was nothing the SEALs could do to help her. The irony was not lost on Rodriguez that their guardian angel might not make it home, despite successfully completing her mission to save them. Sarah's altimeter showed a steady descent that simple mathematics told her would end badly. The mountain ridge ahead rose to over 9,000 feet, while her powerless A-10 was struggling to maintain 8,500 feet and dropping. The aircraft's glide ratio, never impressive even when fully functional, was severely compromised by the combat damage and dead engines. She keyed her radio one more time to provide a position update to the search and rescue forces racing toward her location. Rescue 7-1. I'm approximately 15 miles southeast of Checkpoint Alpha heading 270 degrees. Altitude is 8,000 feet and decreasing. Aircraft is not responding to control inputs. The rescue helicopter pilot's voice carried professional concern mixed with determination. Copy Hawkeye 2-1. We're pushing maximum speed to reach your position. Hang in there. But Sarah knew the mathematics of the situation better than anyone. Even if the rescue helicopter reached her position in time, they would face the challenge of extracting her from mountainous terrain that was potentially still under enemy control. The valley where she had fought to save the SEALs was behind her now, but Taliban forces operated throughout the region. The A-10's control stick felt dead in her hands as hydraulic pressure bled away through damaged lines. She was essentially flying a 20,000-pound glider, with the aerodynamic properties of a brick. Every pilot had practiced dead-stick landings during training, but never in an aircraft this heavy or over terrain this hostile. Her damaged aircraft began to buffet as it approached stall speed. The A-10's low-speed handling characteristics were forgiving under normal circumstances, but multiple combat hits had changed the aircraft's center of gravity and control response. Sarah fought to maintain control while scanning the mountainous terrain ahead for any possible landing site. A narrow valley appeared between two peaks, offering a slim chance of survival if she could maneuver the aircraft through the gap. The valley floor looked relatively flat from her altitude, though she knew that appearances could be deceiving in the mountains. Rock outcroppings, hidden ravines, or scattered boulders could turn an apparent landing site into a death trap. Rescue 7-1. I think I see a possible landing site in the valley ahead. Grid coordinates. Sarah rattled off the location while simultaneously trying to line up her approach. The margin for error was non-existent. She would have one chance to get the landing right. The mountain peaks flashed past her wingtips as Sarah guided her dead aircraft through the narrow valley entrance. The walls seemed close enough to touch, and she could see every detail of the rocky terrain rushing past her cockpit. One wrong move would spread her A-10 across the mountainside in a fireball that would end her story instantly. The valley floor rose up to meet her faster than expected. Sarah realized she was coming in too steep and too fast, but there was no power available to adjust her approach. She would have to ride the aircraft down and hope that the A-10's legendary toughness would protect her during the inevitable impact. The landing gear had been damaged during the combat and wouldn't extend properly, forcing Sarah to attempt a belly landing on rough terrain. She pulled back on the stick as much as possible to flare the aircraft for landing, feeling the nose rise slightly as the A-10 used its last bit of momentum to bleed off airspeed. Impact came with a tremendous crash that threw Sarah against her restraint system with bone-jarring force. The A-10 skidded across the rocky ground in a shower of sparks and debris, its belly grinding against stones and boulders as it carved a furrow through the valley floor. The aircraft slewed sideways before finally grinding to a halt against a large boulder. Silence fell over the valley like a blanket after the thunderous noise of the crash. Sarah hung in her restraints, momentarily stunned by the impact but miraculously conscious. She quickly assessed her condition. Various aches and pains, possible bruised ribs, but nothing that felt life-threatening. The A-10's titanium armor and robust construction had saved her life. She activated her emergency beacon and attempted to contact the rescue forces on her survival radio. Rescue 7-1, this is Hawkeye 2-1. I'm down but alive in the valley. Aircraft is a total loss, but I'm mobile and uninjured. The response came immediately, filled with relief. Outstanding news, Hawkeye. We have your beacon signal and are vectoring to your position. Estimated arrival time 15 minutes. Find cover and stay put. Sarah unbuckled her restraints and prepared to exit the wrecked aircraft. The cockpit canopy was cracked but still functional, and she was able to open it without difficulty. She gathered her survival gear and weapon, knowing that the next 15 minutes could be the longest of her life if enemy forces had observed her crash landing. The wreckage of her A-10 was spread across 50 yards of rocky terrain, testament to the violent forces involved in the crash. But the main fuselage was remarkably intact, another example of the aircraft's incredible durability. Sarah felt a pang of sadness. Looking at the destroyed machine that had carried her through the mission and brought her home, she found a defensive position among the rocks, where she could observe the valley approaches while remaining concealed from casual observation. Her survival radio crackled with updates from the rescue team as they navigated through the mountain passes toward her location. The sound of rotor blades echoing off the valley walls announced the arrival of her rescue helicopter before she could see it. The pilot executed a careful approach, mindful of the high altitude and confined space that made landing particularly challenging. The helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust just 50 yards from Sarah's position. She sprinted toward the aircraft while the crew chief provided security with his door-mounted machine gun. Within seconds, Sarah was aboard the helicopter and lifting off from the valley floor. The entire rescue operation had taken less than 5 minutes, a testament to the professionalism and training of the air rescue crews. As the helicopter climbed away from the crash site, Sarah looked back at the scattered remains of her A-10. The aircraft had given its life to save the SEALs, and she felt honored to have been its pilot during those final moments of glory. Some aircraft were destined for quiet retirement, but her Warthog had gone out fighting. The flight back to Bagram gave Sarah time to process the events of the morning. She had started the day as a routine close air support pilot, but the mission had transformed into something much more significant. 6 elite warriors were alive because she had been willing to push her aircraft and herself beyond normal limits. The rescue helicopter pilot turned to speak to her over the intercom. "Ma'am, we picked up radio traffic about your mission while we were en route. Word is that you saved 6 SEALs who were completely surrounded. That's going to make you pretty popular with the special operations community." Sarah smiled wearily, exhaustion beginning to replace the adrenaline that had sustained her through the crisis. "I just did my job. Those men would have done the same for me." But she knew that what had happened in the valley that morning was more than just doing her job. It was the kind of selfless courage that defined the best traditions of military service, and it would be remembered long after the official reports were filed and forgotten. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in the sterile corridors of Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany, clutching a small bouquet of flowers and feeling more nervous than she had during the entire combat mission. The hospital smell of antiseptic and floor wax reminded her of her own brief stay here after the crash, though her injuries had been minor compared to what some warriors endured. Petty Officer Rivera was awake and alert when she entered his room, though his head was still wrapped in bandages from the surgery that had saved his life. His face lit up with recognition despite the fact that they had never actually met face to face. "You must be the angel pilot who pulled our asses out of the fire," Rivera said with a grin that didn't quite hide the pain medication's effects. "Chief Rodriguez has been telling everyone who'll listen about the crazy Air Force pilot who sacrificed her aircraft to save a bunch of SEALs." Sarah pulled up a chair beside his bed, feeling awkward about the hero worship she'd been receiving, since word of the mission spread throughout the military community. "How are you feeling?" "The doctor said you're going to make a full recovery." Rivera's expression grew more serious. "Thanks to you. Doc Chen said another hour in that valley, and I probably would have bled out from internal injuries they didn't know about. That helicopter ride saved my life, and it only happened because you cleared the landing zone." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the rest of Rodriguez's SEAL team, who had driven over from their temporary quarters at Ramstein Air Base. Chief Rodriguez led the group, walking with only a slight limp from injuries sustained during their escape from the valley. "Lieutenant Mitchell," Rodriguez said formally, then broke into a smile. "Or should I say Honorary SEAL Lieutenant Mitchell. The team voted, and you're officially one of us now." Sarah felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion as each SEAL stepped forward to shake her hand or offer their personal thanks. These were some of the most elite warriors in the world, and their acceptance meant more than any official recognition she might receive. Petty Officer Chen, the medic who had kept Rivera alive during the firefight, handed her a small wooden plaque. "We had this made at the base woodworking shop. It's not much, but we wanted you to have something to remember us by." The plaque bore the seal trident and a simple inscription, "To the Warthog pilot who brought us home. From the men you saved, hoo-yah!" Sarah stared at the gift, feeling tears she hadn't shed during the combat mission finally beginning to flow. "You guys didn't have to do this. I was just doing my job." Walsh, his arm still in a sling from his shoulder wound, shook his head emphatically. "Ma'am, with all due respect, what you did went way beyond duty. You could have broken off when your aircraft started taking damage. Instead, you stayed and fought until we were all safe, even though it meant destroying your plane and almost getting killed." The impromptu reunion was everything Sarah had hoped for and more. Seeing these warriors alive and recovering validated every risk she had taken during the mission. The camaraderie that existed between combat veterans transcended branch of service or military occupation. They were all part of the same brotherhood now. Rodriguez pulled out his phone and showed Sarah a video message from his wife and children back in San Diego. "My family wanted to thank you personally. My oldest daughter wants to be a pilot when she grows up, and now she says she wants to fly A-10s just like her dad's guardian angel." The emotional weight of the moment was almost overwhelming. Sarah realized that her actions had rippled far beyond that Afghan valley, affecting families and communities she would never meet. The responsibility was humbling and empowering at the same time. Santos, the team's radio operator, had brought printouts of news articles about the rescue mission. "You've become pretty famous back home. The story made national news, and there's talk about some major awards being processed through the system." Sarah glanced at the headlines with mixed feelings. Media attention made her uncomfortable, and she worried that the focus on her actions might overshadow the courage and professionalism displayed by the SEAL team during their desperate fight for survival. "The real heroes are sitting in this room," she said firmly. "You guys held your position for hours against overwhelming odds and never gave up. All I did was provide some supporting fire." Thompson, the team's marksman, laughed at her modesty. "Ma'am, you flew a damaged aircraft through enough gunfire to stop an armored division. Then you crashed in the mountains and walked away to fight another day. If that's not heroic, I don't know what is." The conversation continued for another hour, with each team member sharing their perspective on the mission and their gratitude for Sarah's intervention. She learned details about the firefight that she hadn't known during the actual combat, gaining a deeper appreciation for the courage and skill the SEALs had displayed under impossible circumstances. As visiting hours came to an end, Rodriguez stood up to address the group. "I've got some news that I think everyone will want to hear. Lieutenant Mitchell, your squadron commander, called this morning. Your new A-10 is being delivered next week, and they're painting nose art on it that includes the SEAL trident in honor of this mission." Sarah smiled at the thought of returning to combat with an aircraft that carried a permanent reminder of the bond forged in that Afghan valley. The tradition of nose art went back to World War II, when pilots decorated their aircraft to reflect personal achievements or unit pride. "What about you guys? When do you rotate back to the States?" Chen answered for the group. "Rodriguez and I are heading back next month when Rivera is cleared for travel. The rest of the team is getting reassigned to a new deployment in 6 weeks. The war doesn't stop for medical leave." The reality of ongoing military service brought a soberness to the gathering. They all knew that their paths would likely cross again in some other dangerous corner of the world, where American forces were engaged in the endless struggle against terrorism and tyranny. As the SEALs prepared to leave, each man made a point of saying a personal goodbye to Sarah. These weren't casual farewells between acquaintances, but the heartfelt words of warriors who had shared a life-changing experience together. Rivera spoke for all of them with his final words. "Lieutenant, if you're ever in San Diego and need anything, and I mean anything, you call one of us. You're family now, and family takes care of family." Sarah watched them leave, knowing that she had gained something precious and permanent from that desperate morning in Afghanistan. The mission had cost her an aircraft and nearly her life, but it had also given her a brotherhood that would last forever. Standing alone in the hospital corridor, she reflected on the strange turns that military service could take. She had joined the Air Force to fly fighters, ended up in the unglamorous world of close air support, and found her defining moment in a valley most people would never be able to find on a map. Sometimes heroes aren't born from grand strategies or historic battles. Sometimes they emerge from the simple act of doing what's right when everything goes wrong, and refusing to abandon the people who are counting on you to bring them home.